Welcome, everybody. My name is Roger Berkowitz. I'm the founder and academic director here at the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard College. And I'm thrilled to be with you today for the second part of Hannah Arendt's truly incredible and hyper-relevant essay, Truth and Politics. Um, we're reading that as part of, as you know, our reading of the entire book, Between Past and Future, which is a book of essays that Arendt published in two editions. And the book is, as she says, about thinking, about exercises in thinking. And all these essays are exercises in thinking, how to think through complicated political issues at a time of uh, the destruction of the tradition of Western thought. And this is, maybe the most powerful and certainly the most relevant of these essays. It is available here in Between Past and Future. I should point out that there's also an edition of it that came out just 2 years ago in a book edited by my friend David Bromwich on lying and politics, which includes both this essay, Truth and Politics, and her companion essay, Lying in Politics, as well as a great introduction by David Bromwich. Um, Last week, we talked, we introduced the first three sections of this essay, and just a quick recap of some of the central themes, because um, this essay is so important today, and it begins with an insight that is so simple and yet so powerful, which is that truth and politics have very little to do with one another. And, you know, people just don't want to, oh, yeah, we can say that, but what does it mean? I mean, I'm seeing all this stuff on right-wing Twitter these days um, uh, about, mostly clips of left-wing professors who say things like the truth doesn't matter, or, it's not about the truth. And right-wing Twitter and Mr. Musk are using this to say, ha, the truth is coming back, and the truth matters. And these are, easy ways to score some points, but what does it actually mean? What does it mean when Hannah Arendt says that politics and truth uh, don't get along very well, that politics and truth aren't good bedfellows? Well, she starts with this insight, right? That truth is impotent in the public realm. Truth doesn't have much power in politics. Politics is about power on one level. And insofar as it's about power, politics is deceitful. And and so she says it is, she asks the question of, is it of the very essence of truth to be impotent, and of the very essence of power to be deceitful? And this goes against so much of our basic intuitions today, that truth matters, and that, well, we should try and uncover or unmask deceit and tell the truth. So Arendt then goes through this history lesson and tells us that, Plato, back at the beginning of Western political thought, Plato says that the problem with politics is that it's about opinion, or doxa, and we need to replace politics with truth, and we need to replace politicians with philosophers, or what he will call a philosopher king. And that he wants to replace opinion, or doxa, with truth, or orthos, the true knowledge of the philosopher. But in the history of politics and political thought, rational truth, philosophical truth, lost out to doxa. Um, and now she says a new kind of truth has emerged, not rational truth in the philosophical sense of Plato, but factual truth. And now we have a contest, right? A battle between factual truth and opinion, doxa. Um, and she says that factual truths are anti-political, right? If we say it's a fact that Russia is at fault, then politics is over, right? We know who's at fault. We know who's wrong and who's right. Um, and so there's sort of a way in which the battle over facts is a battle over politics. But facts are anti-political. And politics needs to deny facts if it wants to be able to change the world. And so Arendt asks, is truth a legitimate non-political check on political power? Can factual truth actually resist power? And if that's the case, isn't it true that truth is sort of despotic in the sense that truth, as anti-political, as a check on politics, including democratic politics, truth prevents democracy from having an impact. And you can see this in the debates around things like the bureaucracy or deep state or technocracy, insofar as there's a claim that experts, technocrats, civil servants, educated, professional, expert thinkers have a claim to know what the facts are and should be able to govern, right? That's a check on considered to be the unreliable and often fickle and often corrupted opinion of the people. And you see this battle being fought. And what Arendt is saying is, this is a classic battle. It's one that's been going on since Plato's time. Certainly before that, but Plato formulated it, and Plato developed his entire philosophy as an attempt to elevate truth over politics. And Arendt's political thinking is very much an anti-Plato. It's an attempt to understand that we can't elevate truth over politics, that we have to understand that politics has a claim on its own right, because politics is about freedom. Politics is about the freedom to act, to change the world. Whereas truth is, always a kind of despotic limit on freedom and politics. And so that's where we are coming into sections 4 and 5, the last two sections of this essay. Now, it's important to realize that Arendt is not going to throw truth out, right? She's going to make a claim of the importance of truth. So, again, let's hope that there's no right-wing Twitter about to come out and say, Hannah Arendt and Berkowitz say truth doesn't matter. That is not what she's saying. It's not what I'm saying. In fact, she's going to make the opposite argument. She's going to argue that truth is so important and so essential for human life that we need to protect truth from politics, right? There need to be realms in which truth is secured that are free from politics. And politics is going to have to limit itself, limit its freedom, limit its power, and give certain realms to truth that are, in a sense, can't be touched by politics. And only if it does so can then politics in its own realm have the freedom to act to change the world in its pursuit of its opinions and its ideas. Okay, so section 4 of the essay, which we are starting with today, is the section in which Arendt considers what we might call the modern lie. The lying, she says, has a long history, right? It's always been the case that politicians lie, sometimes simply to get elected, sometimes, out of emergencies. You lie and say that there's no tsunami coming because you make a calculation that more people will die from the chaos of escaping a tsunami than from the tsunami itself. You lie and say that we have troops in this area so that the area doesn't get attacked, even though there are no troops there. Lying is part of politics. You lie and say, we're going to defend you and defend Taiwan if China attacks, um, because you don't want China to attack, and it's better to lie than not to lie. And so lies have a long tradition in politics. Um, and in that sense, lies are political. Uh they are a kind of action. Um, uh, when we lie, we make a difference in the world. Um, on the other hand, the person who tells the truth is not an actor. Um, uh, for the most part, the person who tells the truth tells what we all think. He or she says what is, and that's not very controversial. And so the ability to lie, Arendt says, is a kind of freedom, is ability to act politically. The professional historian, the truth teller, denies his or her freedom. They claim fidelity to fact. They say they have to say this happened because it happened. They can't make up a new story that would help them pursue their ideas or their political goals. The professional politician, against the professional historian, embraces a freedom. They're able to lie, right? A politician can get up there and say, you know, immigrants are killing people at a rate unprecedented, right? Okay, it's a lie, but it leads to action, and it's a distortion of facts, but it leads to change. Um, and these kind of lies are political. So lying has an impact. Truthfulness usually has very little impact. It supports the status quo and it rarely changes the world. Only when a community is captured by lying and overarching lying, massive lying, does truth telling become a political activity. It's only when everyone else is caught up in fictions and lies that the truth teller actually can make a difference politically in the world. But even here, Arendt says, truth tellers are at a disadvantage because the liar is free to fashion her facts to fit popular opinion and be more persuasive, right? The liar can lie in a way that she or he knows will appeal to the people, whereas the truth teller has to actually tell the truth. And the truth may be quite uninteresting or uncomfortable. It may also be illogical. The world is not logical, and sometimes truth seems weird. And so there's a huge advantage that liars have over truth tellers. And here's where Arendt really opens the question of the modern lie, or the mass manipulation of fact, beginning on page 247, at least in between past and future. And this modern lie, which she says is a recent phenomenon, is not simply a lie of diplomacy or statecraft. It's not just about particulars. It's meant to deceive everybody and to rewrite the world. It's to rewrite history and to make a new image. One of the most important parts about this new modern lie is that it's not addressed to secrets. It's not, saying like this is happening and we don't want to tell anyone. It speaks about things everybody knows. We all know immigration happens, right? We all know the world is warming, climate change. But the new lie says, um, you know, immigration is, leading to unprecedented murder rates and all sorts of problems and eating cats and dogs and things like that. Um, it's a lie that's out in the public about things we all know about. And here's the big difference then. The regular lie, right? When I say a little lie, we tear a hole in the fabric of factuality. But the fabric remains, it's just a little hole. The texture is still intact, she says on page 248. But the big lie, the massive lie, the modern lie, tends to destroy the entire fabric. It doesn't just hide, it destroys. When the Soviet Union says there was nobody named Trotsky, right? it's not telling a little whole and keeping the fabric intact. It destroys the entire fabric of factuality. Such lies, she says, are violence, right? They seek to destroy. Um, to say there's no global warming, we all know the facts. We all know global warming. To say there's no global warming is to destroy the fabric of factuality. And these lies, she says, are so big that they require a complete rearrangement of the whole factual texture. Insofar as these lies are massive modern lies, they require that we not just lie to others, that we lie to ourselves. And she talks about this on page 249 going forward. Self-deception, not just deception of others, becomes an indispensable tool in such image making. She says that it's actually worse for the world when we deceive ourselves and tell a lie in which we are deceived than when we actually try and deceive others and know that we are doing it, know that we're lying. She offers this funny medieval anecdote, right? It's a famous story where there's a watchtower and the sentry is supposed to warn of enemies coming. And he, as a trick or a joke, sounds the alarm and everyone rushes to the walls and takes up battle and starts shooting. And he's so caught up in the excitement that he rushes to the wall and starts shooting, even though he knew it was a joke. He's the one who started it. She says that this shows that we share the world and reality with others. We share the truth with others. And that the more successful a liar is, the more likely it is that he will fall prey to his own fabrications. If you're really going to tell a massive lie, you sort of have to believe it. If you're going to tell a lie that, the election was stolen, you have to believe it, at least to a large extent. You have to convince yourself because you have to keep telling it and you have to embrace it and embrace this new reality. And so she says that the true danger of this enormity, this enormous capacity of the modern lie is completeness and finality. This is on 251. And this, of course, opens the question of totalitarianism, which is that, for most of us and in most lies, we can't hope for completeness and finality. I mean, today, and I mean this today, there's no totalitarianism, right? Certainly not in our political world. I mean, I can say what I want. You guys can listen to me. We have multiple and divergent image-making machines, right? There's a liberal press and a conservative press and an immigrant press and an anti-immigrant press. There's divergent machines. They're all aimed at their supporters. And the main effect is to support their images. Madison Avenue and propaganda is used by Washington, but it's also used by New York, and it's also used by the Hannah Arendt Center. We have our own social media accounts. And so the point is, right now, there's no real completeness and finality to any of these lies. Um, and yet, in each attempt to build these different image-making machines, you need to make a huge effort to keep the propaganda of the image intact. And the threat is felt by those who are not fully convinced by the spell of the image. The people who show you that the facts don't fit your story, right? The tellers of factual truth, she says, the truth tellers are more dangerous to the image makers than their real opponents. And so just take the two examples, the two biggest examples today. Within MAGA or the Make America Great movement again, who are the people they have to discipline the most? There are people like Lynn Cheney and General Miley, the people who were on their side, but now are telling facts that are inconvenient, right? It's the people who have small differences and then state the facts and thus blow open the story are the most dangerous. Similarly, within what might be called the woke movement, The people who are really dangerous are liberals who pierce the story of, of the kind of woke colonialist, post-colonialist narrative, and say, actually things are getting better, or it's not that bad, or some of these claims are off, are not right, or not factual. Those are the people that are most dangerous. And so, we're in a situation today, I hope, this is something we can talk about, and it's somewhat controversial, but where Arendt thinks, at least when she's writing this, that no government can make an image that's foolproof, right? There is no big brother. There's no totalitarianism today. Part of the problem with totalitarianism, one of the difficulties of totalitarianism that we experienced and we saw in the 20th century is that images have a short shelf life. Even in Russia and Germany, the effort to erase Trotsky, or the effort to say that only some Germans, supported Hitler, they don't last. It's very hard to keep these images alive for generations. They don't generally succeed. And she says, though, the danger, therefore, is not necessarily that the propaganda machine, the modern lying machine, the massive attempt to replace reality, it's not that it will win, in that it will succeed in getting its new truth believed, right? It's rather that what it succeeds in doing is getting its new truth, which is a lie, accepted as an opinion. And insofar as its true truth is accepted as an opinion, it becomes one opinion amongst others, and it leads people to not believe any longer the claims of truth at all. It leads to what she calls a peculiar kind of cynicism on page 252. So she writes, it has been frequently noticed that the surest long-term result of brainwashing is a peculiar kind of cynicism, an absolute refusal to believe in the truth of anything, no matter how well this truth may be established. And she continues at the bottom of 252 on to 253. In other words, the result of a consistent and total substitution of lies for factual truth is not that the lies will now be accepted as truth and the truth defamed as lies, but that the sense by which we take our bearings in the real world and the category of truth v. falsehood is among the mental means to this end is being destroyed. That's what really is the danger that she sees, that we lose the difference between fact and truth, that all facts become opinions, and we end up in this world of pure opinion, which becomes a world of pure power, right? Because there's no truth to be a limit to opinion. And she says, for this trouble, there is no remedy. The danger here is that the real world, the world of fact, the world we share, right? We talk a lot about the common world here. I look out my window, I see trees, I see grass, I see snow today, right? Those are facts. And we lose, and we have to have an agreement on a factual world in order to even talk to each other, in order to share a world. She says we have to be able to have ground under our feet, and the ground under our feet is a common factual world on which we stand. And so the real danger that she writes about on page 253 is not that the lies of the big propaganda machines are believed, but that the world wobbles, right? The experience of a trembling, wobbling motion of everything we rely on for an experience of reality, right? That's what is threatened by these massive propaganda and lying machines. And this is why, even though she thinks truth is anti-political and truth can be despotic, it's why truth matters. Because if we just make everything about power and everything about politics, the world wobbles. We lose any kind of stability and coherence upon which we can live freely in a political world. And so there must be a limit to politics, right? She says power by its very nature can never produce a substitute for the secure stability of factual reality. Politics and power will never create stability because it constantly is freeing. It's based in power. And so if we're going to have a stable world on which we can be free, we need a realm outside of politics. We need a realm of facts, of truth. And facts, she says, are stubborn, and in their stubbornness are superior to power. And this brings us to the last section of the essay on the truth teller, because here her point is that even though truth is impotent and powerless and always defeated by lying and power, it can't be replaced, right? There's no viable substitute for truth, which will stabilize the world. And so what she's now saying is, since we're in this essay looking at politics from the perspective of truth and saying truth is outside of politics, we now need to think that politics, in order to exist, needs to limit itself. It needs to say, yes, we are free, we can change the world, we can act, but there are places we cannot. We need to create anti-political realms, realms of the truth teller. Realms like the solitude of the philosopher, who explores metaphysical truths, the impartiality of the historian, who seeks to tell the truth of what happened, the isolation of the scientist in the laboratory or in the room where he's thinking or she's thinking, who tries to tell the truth about the laws of the universe, the independence of the journalist, the fact finder, and the reporter, who doesn't ever vote. Right? I mean, the old idea that a good objective reporter doesn't vote, doesn't have a party, doesn't engage in politics, and simply tries to tell the facts as they are. The problem, also the impartiality of the judge or the lawyer, who is supposed to simply be in the service of justice and truth. The problem is that these truth tellers, these non-political, anti-political realms, forfeit their position of the truth teller when they try and act politically. So that the truth teller must be in some way alone, not part of a class or group or political commitment. And so she says, we become aware of the non-political and anti-political nature of truth and truth tellers. And we have to create these non-political institutions: journalism, law, academia, science, etc., to uphold the truth outside of politics. Now, of course, these anti-political institutions can be captured and corrupted by politics. I mean, we all know this. And part of what Arendt is writing about here is the feeling in the 1960s, when she's writing this in 1970, but that started then, that these institutions were actually institutions of power, right? Of white power, male power, class power, etc. And there was this sense that the private is political, and that truth is political, and that we have to bring politics into these institutions. And Arendt is saying, I get it. You're right. It is political. There's always going to be some corruption. But if you bring politics into these institutions, what you do is you attack the institutional anti-political status and space of truth. And we can't do that because we need truth to live. And so she says that the main institution that we have to protect, we have to protect all these institutions, but one that she focuses on is, surprisingly, the humanities, right? The humanities, philosophy, politics, literature. What Arendt says here on page 257 is that what the humanities try and do is to say what is, not simply the factual truth which journalists in newspapers say, because reality is more than facts. Reality is the story we tell. It's the story of, America's a land of the free and the equal. Obviously a story that is never going to be fully actualized. But in telling that story, and telling the pain and the sorrow of the failures of that story, but also telling the joy and the bliss of the beauty of that story, the story becomes and the world becomes bearable and meaningful for men. Only when we put it in a story does all the pain and suffering of the world become bearable. And so she says the storyteller, which is what the humanist is the person who allows us to reconcile with reality. The humanist, the storyteller, is the person who teaches us to love the world, to accept things how they are. Not because how they are is always right or just, but they teach us to understand the joy and the bliss amidst the sorrow. And all these politically relevant functions, she says, are outside of politics. She traces it back to Homer, right? And impartiality of singing both Hector and Achilles. And she says, okay, in what I'm saying, there's a fallacy. She realizes that. She's saying, because I'm looking at truth as something outside of politics and saying politics and truth don't go together, I'm suggesting that politics is only about power. And she says that's partly true, but partly not true. She says there's another idea of politics, which we all know Arendt explores in so much of her work, which is that politics is about the joy and gratification that arouse out of acting together with others, in being in the company of our peers, right? In being and acting freely. And she says that's true. But we also have to realize that there's a part of politics which is about power. And that insofar as politics is about power, we cannot make all the world political. We have to limit politics. And that's where truth comes in. Truth is the limit to politics, and we need to preserve the institutions. We need to politically preserve the institutions that limit the power of politics. And then she offers at the very end of her essay, I think one of the greatest lines, not only that she ever wrote, maybe that ever has been written, where she defines truth. And she says, conceptually, we may call truth what we cannot change. Right? Truth is, at its essence, anti-political, opposed to human freedom. It's what is and can't be changed. Of course, it can be changed. We can politically, over time, change what cannot be changed. But the idea conceptually of truth is what is resistant to change. That's conceptually. Metaphorically, truth is the ground on which we stand and the sky that stretches above us. Truth is the common world we share, the stability on which we stand that allows us to be free and engage in political action. Okay, I'll stop there. As I said, this is an extraordinarily rich essay. I think it's much more difficult. It's amazing how often this essay is written about and how wrong most people get it. It's just shocking to me. You know, people read this essay as if it's simply a defense of facts. And, you know, they say, oh, you know, today with X politician, there's an attack on facts, and Arendt stands for facts. Obviously, that's just not right. She does think facts are important, and she says you don't have a right to your own facts. But as we've now explored in these last two sessions, for her, the line between fact and opinion is very difficult to determine, and that most of what people today say are facts are opinions. And as we talked about last week, one of the most important things to do in these kind of conversations is to really do the hard work of distinguishing between fact and opinion. And that's and understanding that facts are the realm of truth that cannot change conceptually, the ground we stand on, that allows for politics in which we begin to have opinions in which we can have meaningful disagreements and arguments and build a common world. Okay, I will now finally stop there. I look forward to this conversation. You can, of course, engage with each other respectfully in the chat. You're welcome to argue with each other, but please argue with the opinions and not the persons. And you can also go down to the react button and raise your hand and engage with us here. Great. I will, as usual, go in order. Lee Cooper, you're first. Lee, you have to unmute.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, got me now. On page 256, Arendt's talking about the self-deception, and this is in my edition the last sentence on the top paragraph. Arendt writes, "The strength of their arguments lies in the undeniable fact that under fully democratic conditions, deception without self-deception is well nigh impossible." It made me think back to the Vietnam War and the admission, finally, years later, by McNamara specifically, that both he and Johnson knew in 1965 that the war was basically unwinnable, and yet they continued. So they were not self-deceived. They knew what the outcome would very, very likely be. And so I just want to temper that remark of Arendt's. McNamara admitted that many years later, shortly before he died, I think in the late 1980s or early 1990s. So I just wanted to qualify that particular point of Arendt. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. It's actually a great point. I mean, insofar as McNamara and knew that there was deception going on, first of all, let me actually back up and say, I think many of the people preparing the Pentagon Papers didn't know, right?
Right.
They
Right.
deceived themselves. And in the other essay, the companion essay, right, on lying in politics, which is in this little book, or also published in her book, Crises of the Republic, she talks about how easily the chattering classes, the experts, the bloviators on TV, deceive themselves, and they convince themselves of what they of what they think is of their arguments, because they make their arguments into logical, socially scientifically required claims, right? The domino theory. They come up with a theory, and then they believe the theory, and the theory actually takes precedence over reality. That said, right, the fact that people like McNamara admitted that they knew it was a lie, could be seen, right, from Arendt is understanding it, as one of the reasons why the lie didn't work, why the lie came out, because if you're going to succeed in lying to a democratic public, you have to fully believe it, or you leave openings. There's always going to be people who see through the lie, right? I mean, you see it today, right? There are plenty of people, both Republicans and Democrats, who see through the lie that the 2020 election was stolen. How do you respond when that happens? If you respond defensively, your story breaks down. But if you respond aggressively and you say it's not a lie, here's why, and you have a theory, right? You have a theory that COVID and the changing election laws and absentee ballots and all this stuff, suddenly you can keep your theory alive, and it doesn't, and your story is not torn apart. And that's I think an important part of why she thinks self-deception is so important. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Hannah.
Okay, hi. I have several comments, but let me ask a question first. I'm having a hard time situating Arendt's placement in history, the chronology of, where this is happening, at what point in history is this happening? You understand in the origins of totalitarianism that she's talking about the emergence of she's talking about certain historical times with Stalin and Hitler, and we understand. But she's going back and forth between Plato and Aristotle and etc. But she's acting as if this is a fairly recent phenomenon. But it's very hard for me to kind of figure out chronologically why she, because she's making so many universal truths, and at the same time she's situating it in modernity. So I would love to hear a bit if you could, answer that. But let me just make a few comments. As somebody who's studied a lot, has a degree in advanced degree in communications, I'm constantly thinking of people like McLuhan and Neil Postman, who was an educator, and Joshua Meyerowitz. Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death, Joshua Meyerowitz, No Sense of Place, and of course McLuhan, who was writing when Arendt was writing, who had very, very profound things to say about the shaping of our perceptions of truth in politics in many ways. And it's, you keep wondering what she would say today with the really the totalitarianism of the media on our experience of politics in a sense. But if you could situate, what does she mean? Where is this happening? At what point? Why is it an emergency as she's writing versus, well, as for example,
No, I get it. I get it, Hannah. Can I
Yeah.
let me try and answer your question because I think it's a
Okay.
great question.
Okay.
So I will go chronologically. So she begins encountering this problem writing The Origins of Totalitarianism. And in the third part of The Origins, called Totalitarianism, um, she talks a lot about propaganda, but more importantly, the way movements attack reality. And she writes a lot about how totalitarian movements seek to replace the complexity of reality with a coherent fictional narrative. And one of the insights she has, right, is that in a period in which people are feeling alone, lonely, without purpose, the breakdown of the Western tradition, the loss of the pillars, the break in tradition, as we talked about it, right? People need a story that gives them a sense of purpose or meaning. And what she says is the people who provide that story, a lying, coherent fictional narrative, a logical, an ideology, one that's based in pseudoscience, but she says it only emerges after the scientific and social scientific revolutions, because in order for these stories to work, they have to claim scientific validity. So Darwinism, right? Survival of the fittest is one story. Marxism, the triumph of the proletariat is another story. And she says these logical pseudo logical, pseudoscientific stories are actually more uh, um, believable to most of us than the reality, because the reality is often confused and incoherent. And so she starts there. Um, in 1967, when she writes this essay, she's responding to the attack on her book on Adolf Eichmann, which came out in 1963, right? And she's shocked that people are saying she wrote things that she didn't write. And she's saying, look, there was a mass manipulation of fact out there by people who kept saying, I wrote things which I didn't write. And it fit into a story and a narrative, and people believed it. At the same point, people said things happened at the trial which didn't happen. And again, she's saying it fit into a story. And so she writes this essay on truth and politics in response to her experience of being on the wrong side, in a way, of a mass lie, a massive lie, a modern lie, a mechanical propagandistic lie by institutions and groups across the world that she thinks she experienced, and she's interested in that here. In 1971, 4 years later, she writes the second essay, Lying in Politics, in response to the Pentagon Papers, exactly what Lee was just asking about, in which she says, you know, the all of these people involved in the government and in the press were caught up in theories, and the domino theory was a big one, and the idea being that they were so convinced of the theories that they couldn't. Anytime the facts didn't fit the theories, they just said, forget the facts. And so she's all of these, again, it's part of her larger argument that there's a kind of pseudoscientific ideological need for coherent stories that makes us avoid the messiness of reality. Plato comes in simply because in her more political philosophical vein, when she thinks about this on a larger question through the history of thought, what she says is that Plato was the first anti-political thinker. He was the first thinker to say, look, politics leads to mass deception. It leads to the victory of doxa. It leads to the victory of propaganda and opinion against the truth. And he saw that happen with the death of his mentor, Socrates. And so she thinks Plato develops this idea of truth as something to be pursued in isolation by a philosopher through the theory of ideas, and then the rule of the philosopher king, which is to limit and be against politics. And so what she's doing in her work is trying to, on the one hand, defend politics, which, as you all know, since you read Hannah Arendt, is something she has an enormous amount of respect and love for. Politics as the place where people act together and exercise their freedom to change the world. And yet, to also understand that politics can, in a sense, eat its own tail. If you allow politics to exist without limitations, it will eat the world. It will make the world as a stable place, which we also need in order to be free, disappear. And so these essays are her attempt, in the wake of both totalitarianism, the Eichmann trial, the Pentagon Papers. It's her attempt to try and say, we see in the 20th century a new power to politics, a kind of totalitarian, massive propagandistic machine that is able to, in a sense, put forward massive lies that retell the story of the world. And in such an environment, truth is at risk. Truth as the ground we walk on. and we need to protect that ground.
And that's really wonderful, Roger. I just want to say that the social media as a vehicle for spreading it is extraordinary. And, like I just remember reading um, uh, Neil Postman, and he said, in the 18th century, he called it the ultimate age of reason, the pinnacle of rational argument. And the reason he said that is because, the printed word was absolute, king. And he talked about how presidents could walk around, and not even be recognized by the average citizen, but they would understand the arguments in a deep way. But, because that was the communication, was by print and whatever. And now, you've got this entire world saturated, sitting there anxiously thinking about frigging Trump, destroying all of our brain cells because of the vehicle, because of social media, and I'm not being coherent about it. What you answered was very helpful for me in situating how she was dealing with this. But I do think the social media aspect of what she's talking about too. And of course, you're talking about propaganda, which has to be spread mass spreading. But we're even beyond the type of mass that she was talking about, don't you think now?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to get too much into this, but you're
Right.
absolutely right. But the danger of social media, which by the way is simply a tool and is not evil in its own right, but it can be used for good or evil. But the danger of social media is the algorithmic and viral characteristics of it, right? The algorithm can be tweaked in different ways. And if the algorithm is designed for profit, and profit means the most time people listening, if you find that what makes people listen the most or watch the most or engage the most is resentment, anger, and a sense of outrage, then the algorithm will provide you with things that outrage you.
Right.
And that's the danger of social media, is that it's beyond the capacity of human. Not you couldn't have a human press so well designed to take you out of reality and into a kind of fantasy of outrage. And that's where we're at right now.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Ken Landauer.
Oh, thanks, Roger. So I'm struggling with, I see this essay differently in a way than you're framing it. Mostly in that, in this essay, I think she defines politics the most narrowly as in anywhere else in her writing. She defines it as so tightly that it's not necessarily people coming together. It's really talking about politicians. So it's saying politicians persuade, that's their job, which she says elsewhere. And this essay seems especially relevant right now because of what she's saying in the end, that lies can dominate, the most effective opposition to truth is plain lies. It's not things being wrong or playing with the facts. And the MAGA movement has really kept our public conversation focused around those plain lies. So we really are focused on the lowest level of conversation. There's no dignity in our politics right now. And they're really good at that. So instead of talking about why a plane comes down, we're talking about whether DAI caused it. And that narrowness, I think, has to be preserved when we talk about this, that she's really only talking about the lowest level of politics, on the levels of interest and power, which is where our politics are right now. But I don't think when you say that MAGA and DEI and the woke movement are similar, I think she's actually saying in this essay, it's our job to make a very distinct difference between those movements, because one is based on what you said, like election denial and eating dogs, and one is based on history and civil rights. And the movements are bigger than this narrow definition of politics she's talking about. The movements are where people are coming together.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Um, uh, you know, you said, for her, right, politics has different sides, right? Politics is on the one hand about freedom, acting together, and politics is about, as freedom and acting together, power. And in most of her work, she joins those two together and wants to talk about politics jointly as this noble realm in which we have the power to act and exercise our human freedom. In this essay, she is dividing politics in a sense and saying, yes, politics is this noble endeavor of freedom. And yet, in the modern era, in the era of these massive lies, and moreover, in the era of the confusion of fact and opinion, politics threatens to undo itself, right? I've said it before, and I think that's where she's after. And so we actually have to protect realms of truth, and she's obviously, and this goes back to Hannah's question to some degree, she's responding to a lot of what's going on in the 1960s, the attack on the universities as a kind of ivory tower separate from politics. And you have the Berkeley student movements and others saying, no, the academic world is a world of power. And the critique of law, critical legal studies, and legal realism, saying no, it's not that law is about some pursuit of impartial justice, but the law is political and has interests, and journalism, and objectivity, and the critique of all of these. And she understands these critiques, and as she says, they're not wrong. All of these realms are corrupted and corruptible. And yet, what she's saying is that the overwhelming effort to politicize everything is destroying the real world, the world of truth. And the result is that there's no place to take refuge. And as a result, all politics is reduced to power. And we lose any ability to constitute a free world, because you can't actually constitute a world. Every new world is immediately undermined and attacked as another world of power. And that's the worry she has. I think without a doubt, in the context of post-1960s politics, sorry, can we mute people? Someone's running something. Yeah, in the context of post-1960s politics, you can accuse Arendt here of being a political conservative, insofar as she is saying that even though there is a politics to a lot of these institutions, we have to preserve their independence and their at least aspirational effort to achieve truth. And I think that's an important claim.
But can I just reiterate the last part?
I'm still going to get to your other part of your question, which is that, I'm sorry, somebody is running water or something. I need to mute people and, all right. The other part of your question, is that you want to say that there's a distinction between the lies told by MAGA and the lies told by the woke movement. Obviously, there's a distinction in that they're different lies. But they're both lies. Um, you know, and they're both, and I'll just say this, and this is going to be, well, you'll take it as it is, right? I will tell you that in my experience in the last 10 years, my ability and my uh, um, willingness to speak freely has been much more negatively impacted by the left than by the right. Right? As someone who, for most of my life, and associates himself with the left, um, uh, the worry about being attacked by the left in the last 10 years has been much more impactful in my life than by being attacked on the right, by the right. Um, uh, there are, obviously there's a truth to historical racism and institutional racism throughout this country and sexism and others. I mean, I think you'd have to be an idiot to think otherwise. But the claim that anytime you use a certain word or a pronoun or you say something or you don't make a land acknowledgement or something, you are engaging in some sort of organized oppression or something like that. And if you respond to that and then you're criticized and more for it, as you have been for the last 10 years or 15 years, there's no doubt that that is a kind of mass organized, coherent lying that we've been exposed to. And I think it's very dangerous, just as I think the lying of the MAGA movement is incredibly dangerous. And to not say so is, I think, wrong.
I agree with you fundamentally when it comes, because you're talking about ideologies taking over truth, that there's a kind of Stalinism in the woke movement or something like that. But in terms of this essay alone, where politics is defined so narrowly, I think we can't lump DEI together with MAGA movement, especially in this moment, to say that DEI is based on a historical fact. And if we're talking about just pure facts, I'm not talking about where they take it. I agree with you completely about you being attacked by the left. I'm not talking about where they take it. I'm just talking about the basis of it. If the basis is based on plain lies, it's very different than the basis of it being based in civil rights and history.
Yeah,
Just
we could have an argument about this. I mean, there are also facts on the other side, right? I mean, the people who argue that the election was stolen, they have facts on their side, which is not to say that I think they're right. There were changes to election law. There are things that are changing. I mean, the amount of absentee ballots and stuff like that, I think they're fine. I'm supportive of it, but it is a change, and one can make these arguments. I think they're wrong. But this is a longer conversation. I don't want to get caught up in it completely. So let's just table it for now and say that there are differences, and yet what you see on both sides is the dominance of ideological propagandistic stories being disseminated that seek to reshape the fabric and image of the world. So I'm just going to move on because we could have a longer conversation about this. Lori.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, your explanation, helped. I'm still struggling a bit. Is Arendt not sort of arguing for a more democratization of politics? Because you made the comment that politically we have to limit the politicization of humanities, education, or whatever. But how do you do that without a democratic base?
So, whether Arendt is a Democrat or not is one of those questions that you can't answer because it depends what you mean by Democrat. On one level, Arendt is a Democrat, right? If you mean by Democrat She believes in the rule of the people. And she believes in the dignity of each person to have a, a right to speak and act in public in a way to be heard. She thinks that's the ultimate human right. Um, and and she is a profound proponent of that. On the other hand, she knows and believes that to simply let the will of the people rule leads to tyranny and often to horrific political acts. What Tocqueville called the tyranny of the majority, or what she experienced as totalitarianism, and certainly what Plato saw as the ease at which democracy turns into demagoguery. And so she believes in the importance of institutionally limiting the will of the people, but not by a philosopher king or a tyrant or a benevolent monarch or someone in power, but as she develops it in her writings, by multiplying powers and multiplying institutions, so that no one institution can ever become omnipotent. The old, if you want to put it in a language of the young, or of now the old, but used to be the young, she's always opposed to one ring to rule them all. She wants multiple rings, 9 rings, as Tolkien put it, 9 kingdoms. She wants 50 states. She wants federalism. She wants multiple spaces of power that can contest each other, so that within each one, people have the dignity to speak and act in public, and they can be powerful. And it's unlikely, it doesn't mean it won't happen, but it's unlikely, or at least less likely, that in such a situation, one institution or one group will assume power and control the world. And so Arendt is certainly a Democrat in her respect for the dignity of speaking and acting for each person, and having an opinion that is equally good as everyone else's. But she's a constitutionalist and a federalist and an institutionalist in her attempts to think through political structures that will protect the democratic spirit from becoming tyrannical. At the same time, in this essay, she's adding another aspect to that, not just constitutionalism, not just federalism, not just institutions, but institutions that are non-political. The law, journalism, academia, etc., that need to be protected from politics.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Kay. Or is that who? Oh no, is Annette next? Or did Annette just, I'm sorry, I got confused.
I'm sorry, I'm not showing my face, but my camera doesn't work.
All right. Okay. Yes, Annette, you're next, and then Kay. I'm sorry, Kay. You'll come next.
It's okay.
Okay. No, mine is really short and maybe very simple, but it's one sentence on page 245, where it says that while the liar is a man of action, the truth teller, whether he tells rational or factual truth, most emphatically is not.
Yeah.
And I did get the thing that the truth teller is not changing the world because he's just stating the obvious. But on the other hand, I mean, no one is compelled to tell the truth. I mean, no one, Hannah Arendt wasn't forced to write her book on Eichmann. She's not forced to write this essay. And she is actually at least attempting to tell us the truth. Why is that not an action? But I think that's my question. Why does that not qualify as an action? Because you do you do something that's not, you're not forced to do it. It's not something that comes without any effort. It does take a decision. Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Annette. That's a great question. I mean, so there's maybe a bit of overstatement here. Think about a journalist, right? A journalist who goes to cover an election and says, Joe Biden won the election in 2020. And then a journalist goes to cover the election in 2024 and says Donald Trump won the election in 2024. What she's saying is this isn't a political claim that the journalist is making. They're just reporting the facts. And so far as they're reporting the facts, yeah, I mean, it's a kind of action in that they're doing it and it might take some effort, but they're not trying to exercise their freedom to change the world. They're just doing their job, which is to report the facts. But when another journalist comes along and says in 2020, no, Donald Trump won the election and it was a fraudulent and stolen election, then that person is actually exercising their freedom to try and change the world. And so, that person, that journalist is becoming a political actor, whereas the first one is simply, reporting the facts and not trying to act or exercise freedom. Now, in a world in which telling the facts has become more and more contested, and in which, many journalists are engaging in political lies, then you're right, telling the truth becomes a choice, an act of freedom, and becomes a political act. At that point, then, of course, telling the truth is not just telling the truth. It becomes political, and it begins to undermine the authority of the journalist, because the journalist is now seen as engaged in a political endeavor. And in that sense, we lose the institutional integrity of journalism. And so what she's trying to say here is that by saying that the truth teller is not a man of action, is she's trying to hold on to the idea that there are non-political institutions, an idea which she knows is false if you look at these institutions critically. All institutions, right, have interests behind them. She knows that. But she says we have to strive in some way to preserve the integrity of these, which means that even when we find out their interests and we find out that we have to try and we have to try and make them resist those interests. We have to protect them and purify them. And that's a constant struggle. Okay. Okay, Jason.
Oh,
Were you saying something? I can't hear you.
you skipped me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Your hand went down, Kay. I apologize, Kay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I guess, okay. So, I just wanted to react to something, in a somewhat unsophisticated and probably naive manner. The idea that politicians will always lie, not the lies employed to keep power, but those that, Roger, you said are a beneficial necessity because the truth will, for instance, cause chaos, because the lie will ultimately save more people than it will hurt. That assumes that the populace, are not intelligent enough, informed enough, that they don't have the ability to see the larger picture that the politician can see. And I want to reject that. I suppose as an educator, it means to me we have to do a better job of educating all people to be critical thinkers who can understand and even accept even difficult truths, including from the mouths of politicians. And I am unwilling to give up the hope of a truthful politics in spite of Arendt's very convincing arguments, and I guess in spite of what we have seen throughout history. And I just
Thank
wanted
you.
to share that.
Thanks, Kay. Yeah, I mean, look, I admire your convictions, and I would love to agree with you. And I'm not saying that a politician should lie. In you know, take a couple of examples that I've written about at times, right? I mean, imagine you get intelligence that there's a nuclear bomb in the center of Manhattan. You have to get the people who are going to defuse the bomb to the bomb. Do you immediately announce it so that the roads get clogged and everyone's trying to get out, or do you wait until the people who are going to defuse the bomb are there, right? I'm not saying I have the right answer, right? You could say there's a nuclear bomb. We ask everyone to stay at home for the next hour until we can get the people there so that they will not clog the roads, and hope they comply because they're educated and rational, and as you put it. Or you can wait an hour and tell them an hour later. I don't know which is the right approach. I'm just saying that, and Arendt is saying that there are politicians who make both choices, and lying is, a tool of politics, and it always has been. And sometimes it's for the bad and sometimes it's for the good. But that kind of lie, she says, is not the modern lie. It's not the lie that rends the fabric of reality. Yeah, I mean, I think you can make a case either way. I don't think it's a one-sided answer. Jason.
I'll dovetail right in on that. One of the takeaways that I'm confusing myself, or maybe pandering to myself from this reading, was in the section that where Trotsky gets his bad news about how he's probably doomed. That's 253 for the older version, and I'm not sure where that is for everyone else in the newer version. One of the things that I thought that really it pinged my my coding analysis of all this was the discussion of that all these lies, whether their authors know it or not, harbor an element of violence. Organized lying always tends to destroy whatever it has decided to negate, although only totalitarian governments have concisely adopted lying as the first step to murder. And finishes that paragraph. In other words, the difference between traditional lie and the modern lie will more often than not amount to the difference between hiding and destroying. And this actually brought forward one of my older notations about the issue of a work and how they're kind of processing the truths into something that they would rather see, in the same way that you have to process the tree in order to make a table. And there's this kind of a means ends approach to this particular angle on political activity, where I suppose I think what maybe Kay is referencing, and maybe this is where I wound up, was it could be enjoyable. It could be, instead of a means ends approach, we could actually engage in that smaller on the ground level means approach of trying to better the world. Politics doesn't have to be a desperate place of scum and villainy. I mean, it could be a place where, sure, we're making up stuff, we're telling stories, but we're telling stories to inspire one another, to do something together, to do something productive. And I think maybe that kind of gets lost when we just keep on banging our gavel about who's lying and so on and so forth. Yeah. And I'm wondering if
I agree. I mean, Arendt uses the example of the claim that all men are created equal, right? She says, of course, men aren't created equal. I mean, who would think such a thing? I mean, just look at all of us on the screen. We're all different. And some of us are taller and some of us are, stronger, and some of us are smarter, and some of us are cleverer, and some of us are, have more emotional intelligence. We're all different. She says the claim that all men are created equal is one of the greatest lies in history. And it's a good lie. It's the lie, she says, that underlies liberalism. And she thinks it's one of the greatest political lies ever perpetrated on the people of the world, and one she supports wholeheartedly. But what she says is, lying is politics, and that doesn't mean lying is bad. Martin Luther King's lie, right? That we should be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. It's a great lie. It's an ideal to aspire to. It's rarely going to happen in practice, but it's one that we should try to make real. And she believes wholeheartedly that lying can be a great thing. And that a good politician or a great politician is one who can tell great lies and help make them become seen as true. So yeah, I think, I don't see this claim that politics is about lying is all negative at all. If I gave that impression, I apologize. Joanne.
Yeah, I agree with Ken that this seems to be a pretty limited idea of politics, and with Kay also, that politics is really always going to be about lies. And what it sounds like to me and what I'm reading is that she's saying any action is really a lie. Any action, on the world stage. I mean, not when you're washing your coffee cup or
Not any action is a lie. I mean, you could have an action where you jump, or you an action where you kill someone. That's not a lie, it's an action.
Mhm.
But what she is saying, that lying is an action. All
Yep.
great lies are actions insofar as they try and make something that is not so, and thus they act freely in the world to change the world. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
But are all great actions lies?
No, of course not. Let me think about it, but I don't think so. I mean, if I kill Hitler, that's a great action, but I don't think it's a lie.
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be a confusion between goals and physical actions. I don't know. It doesn't seem that clear.
It's not physical actions, but for her to act is to act together with others freely. To act and to be free are the same, she says. And so when you act, you have to exercise your freedom. And that's what and so to that extent, when you lie and say something is so that is not so, you're exercising your freedom in a way that simply saying what is so is not.
Well, do you think that we could say that the lie is really that another term for this lie, this political lie, would be a perspective or taking a stand, taking any kind of stand in the public forum?
Well, I mean, if you're taking a stand that seeks to change something that exercises your freedom, yes, I think it would be a kind of action. It doesn't have to be a lie. But I'm missing what is bothering you.
Well, it's just that there seems to be this identity of anything, any kind of action that we could call vaguely political with a lie.
No, I don't think so. Okay, it's one direction, not the other.
Okay.
All lying is political. All great lying is political. Not all political actions are lies, right?
Okay. I have a question which might be a quick question, but I don't want to seem to align myself with Tulsi Gabbard, but I would like to hear your thoughts on Edward Snowden and before him, Chelsea Manning. What in terms of what would Arendt say about Edward Snowden's actions, about stealing and releasing these documents, which were documents saying that the U.S. government is spying on its citizens?
I wrote a lot of, I invited and had Edward Snowden speak at the Arendt Center whenever, 10, 12 years ago. And you can go back and hear our conversations. I've written about him. I don't, again, I think she would say it was a political act. Insofar as it was, you can judge it, as a political act. It was, but I don't, it's a much, whether I agree with Edward Snowden or not is just a political opinion. Let me get John's question because he's been waiting and we can always come back to this. John Holt.
Hey, Roger. I think there's some confusion about what you said about Jefferson, and we hold these truths to be self-evident. And I understand Arendt's point that he didn't want such a notion as human equality to be disputed. They considered that beyond dispute. I wouldn't consider that to be a lie, however. I would consider that to be a statement of faith. If you want, a belief, but I would make it stronger, a statement of faith that we, the undersigned, all the people that signed the Declaration, bought into this. We are founding a new country based on a new concept that does not exist in the world. We are saying we are those who believe that all men are created equal and that this will constitute an act of faith going forward with this new nation. And then when Lincoln reprised that in his Gettysburg Address, he emphasized that it was the foundation of the new country. We hold these truths to be self-evident. When he said 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. It's a new beginning with a new set of premises, and it's an article of faith. It's not a lie.
So first of all, Arendt thinks that when she talks about the origin of this lie, she doesn't talk about Jefferson or Lincoln. She talks first about mostly about Hobbes and Rousseau. Those are the people who she thinks are the beginning of modern liberal ideas. You can call it a proclamation of faith in the Constitution and the Declaration. And I'm not going to disagree with you. All I will tell you is clearly when Jefferson wrote those words, it was a lie, right? We did not have a land of everyone being equal or liberty. And it's still a lie. We still don't have a land of everyone being equal and free. I agree with you. It's a proclamation of faith, but it's one that we hold these truths to be self-evident. Yeah, we are lying, but lying in an act of faith. I agree with you. But it still doesn't make it true.
I still disagree with your understanding of that, but we're out of time. So
okay, Great. I apologize. Anyway, really appreciate this conversation. These are fun texts. Feel free to share them with other people if you want. We're going to have our last meeting about this book, this wonderful book, Between Past and Future, next Friday, and we'll be discussing another favorite essay of mine, one that is obviously also quite timely today on technology and artificial intelligence, called The Conquest of Space. Look forward to talking about it with you next week. Enjoy reading Hannah Arendt, and we'll see you next week.